In the middle of a snowstorm, he gave no explanation, just rode through the night, left the medicine on the doorstep, and slept beneath the horse trough. There are men so quiet in their living that when they die, even the house does not know. Elias Rourke was one such man. Until one rainy day, he bought a widow and her 5 children for reasons no one could understand. And from that moment on, those who thought they were lost found one another, not by blood, but by the will not to abandon. The sky had not yet fully brightened. A deep gray canvas smeared with faint silver-purple streaks stretched low behind the hills of grass. A dry gust swept across the land, carrying dust and the pungent mix of horse manure, rotting wood, and time. The old wooden door creaked open. Elias Rourke stepped out, his thick boots landing on the porch floor with a dull thud, like a soft knock on memory. He wore no coat, just a faded shirt and rough, calloused forearms rolled up to the elbows. His face was lean, his chin stubbled with ash-colored whiskers. A large frame, slightly stooped forward, as if the weight of the past forever tugged at his shoulders. No one could guess Elias's age, only that he had lived through many droughts and many funerals. He said nothing, didn't cough or curse like the old men from the neighboring ranches. He simply stepped out, just as he did every morning, right on the second flap of the blind rooster's wings. The front yard was coated in a layer of golden dust, the kind that can't be swept away, only lived with. Dried vines curled around a broken post. An old wagon, wheelless, lay tilted in the corner, green moss clinging to its axle like dentures planted in sand. Elias stopped at the water trough. He bent down, dipped his hands into the icy water, not to wash, not anymore, but to confirm. Today was still a day to live. Then he turned away. The wooden house seemed split in two. One half, where he lived, was tidy, orderly like a military barracks. Every cup, every coat hook, every oil lamp exactly in place. The windows were wiped every Thursday morning. The fireplace was lit with dry pine wood, stacked in a perfect A shape, just as his father's Civil War manual had instructed. But the other half was buried under dust, like a gravestone in winter. The curtain had faded in the sun. A small stuffed bear lay face down on the rocking chair. A hand-drawn frame hung on the wall, its crayon sketch showing a 3-legged horse flying in the sky. A small table sat by the window, still holding an open book, one page curled by the wind, as if the reader had just stepped out and would return any moment now. Elias had not set foot in that half of the house since the day of mourning. And from that day forward, a tiny pair of shoes, pink cloth shoes no bigger than a man's palm, remained by the doorstep. They were covered in dust, but not lost in it. There was something in the way they lay still that made one afraid to touch them, as if any disturbance would cause time itself to collapse. Elias passed by those shoes every day, never once looking down, and yet, strangely, his footsteps always tilted slightly to the other side, to avoid shifting them even an inch. In the barn, the old mare rested her head against the gate, silent as carved wood. Elias scratched her neck. He did not speak her name. The horse did not neigh. They had lived together too long to need words. The sun had risen over the hill. A golden light poured across the porch roof, over Elias's boots, and slipped across the long shadows in the yard. Elias sat on the step, resting both hands on his knees, an unconscious habit, as if waiting for someone to sit beside him. But no one came. No one had come in many years. A crow cried out from somewhere far away. The wind nudged the window frame, and another morning began. Just like every other morning, no one knocked on the door, no one needed him, and Elias wasn't going anywhere until today. The rain had started the night before, the quiet kind of rain, persistent and soft, not quite ending, yet never rising into a storm. a kind of rain that lingered like memory, enough to turn soil into mud, clothes into burdens, and voices into whispers drowned by water. That morning Elias Rourke saddled his horse, double-checked the knots, then pulled out a leather notebook tucked inside his shirt. He was headed to town to buy a new plow blade to replace the old one that had broken near the eastern fence post. That was the only reason he ever left the ranch. Things no one else could do. Elias didn't know and wouldn't have guessed that this trip would be different. Galloway, in the rainy season, looked like ashes spilled on the earth, mixed with blood. The wooden buildings soaked through, crooked signs swaying, mud caked thick around wagon wheels. Right in the center was the auction yard, where they once sold horses, cattle, and sometimes people. Under the new law, it wasn't called selling people anymore, just temporary labor valuation. But anyone who had lived long enough knew. Anything that had a price had already lost its dignity. Elias arrived just as they were announcing the final lot, a phrase that made people think more of dry straw than of fate. A silver-bearded man stood on the wooden block, whip in hand, voice raised over the rain. A widow, 5 children. The oldest is a boy, 14, arms like a stone breaker. The youngest just over a year, but strong, healthy, no sickness, the whole lot. Below, a few harsh chuckles rose up. Someone called out, "Can the wife cook?" Another shouted, "Does the price include sleeping rights?" And the whip cracked against the post as if to strike in place of the law's silence. Elias didn't look at the platform. He looked at the woman. She stood there, soaked, shivering, but upright. She wasn't holding her children's hands because her arms were wrapped around the smallest one, bundled in a worn-out cloth. The others stood shoulder to shoulder, pressed together like a mended fence of broken rails. The woman didn't beg, didn't look at anyone, didn't protest. She wasn't dressed well, patched clothes, bare feet, mud up to her ankles. But in that posture, there was something that made Elias stop walking. Not beauty, not pity, but life itself, clinging to what little silence it had left. The auctioneer's voice faltered. He saw Elias step forward. Elias said nothing, didn't ask, didn't haggle. He simply pulled from his inner pocket a wad of bills, tied with a strip of cloth, and tossed it onto the wooden block. The thud it made rang heavier than any gavel. "The whole lot," Elias said. "I'll take them." The woman turned to look at him. Her eyes held nothing but emptiness. Not coldness, but the look of someone who had cried themselves dry and now only existed. He looked at her. She looked at him. No nod, no bow, no thank you. Just 2 people, one who had lost, one still losing, meeting in the rain. And they stepped out of the crowd together, as if a wound had closed without blood, without sound. Elias's wagon was old, without a cover. The rain kept falling. He climbed onto the driver's seat, turned his back, said nothing. The woman climbed up after, holding her child close, calling the others to follow. The auctioneer watched them go, then turned to the crowd. "Don't blame me," he said. "We're just helping them survive." A dry laugh echoed from somewhere. Or helping them die slower. The small group disappeared from the auction yard, leaving behind mud-soaked ground, the drip of water from rooftops, and a few drifting stairs, like smoke from cigarettes rising into the rainy sky. The road from town back to the ranch felt longer than usual, not because of the rain or the mud, but because there were now 6 people sitting behind Elias. 6 unfamiliar breaths. 6 silent heartbeats that had never touched his life before. The wagon jolted and creaked. The wheels sank deep into the mire, as if the earth itself wanted to hold them back, as if even the ground was surprised that a solitary man would suddenly drag home an entire roof that didn't belong to him. Elias didn't look back. He simply guided the horse, kept his hands steady on the reins, but he heard the breathing. Short, heavy, shivering like the sound of a winter stove. He heard the rustle of wet fabric, a child sniffling, and even a quiet, nervous gulp. She, the woman, sat just behind him. The baby slept in her arms. Her name was May Callahan, but Elias didn't know that, and he didn't ask. At the fork in the road, where the old pine had split last year, Elias pulled the reins. The horse stopped. He climbed down without a word, circled to the back, and unfastened a bundle of dry grass that had been tied to block the rain. The children looked up at him as if watching a statue begin to move. May kept the baby in her arms, never letting go. Elias brought the bundle forward, wiped the bench seat quickly. Then he looked at her, for the first time in the faint light of a cold afternoon. His gaze held no invitation, but it held no rejection either. It was simply a look without demand, without retreat. She laid the baby down on the dry grass, carefully, as if placing it in the hands of God. The children gathered close. The way they moved, quick but not pushing, quiet but not panicked, showed they were used to leaving places behind. Elias climbed back into the seat. So did she. No one spoke. The wagon rolled on. Through the stretch of pine forest, the rain stopped. The sky was gray, damp, filled with the scent of rotting leaves. Elias spoke, barely above a whisper. "My name is Elias Rourke. I live at the foot of the West Hill. Got a ranch, some horses, one old dog. Not much." She replied after a few wagon jolts. May Callahan." Elias didn't nod. She didn't bow. It was as if both had simply cast their names into the wind, to be carried wherever it wished. The wagon slowly turned onto the trail leading to the ranch. One of the children, the youngest besides the infant, reached a hand out from beneath a rough shawl, trying to touch a raindrop clinging to the wagon's edge. A tiny hand, caked in mud, scratched and raw. Yet it still reached, as if it believed the world might hold something softer than dry hay and cold stone. Elias saw the hand from the corner of his eye, but he did not turn around. When the ranch came into view, low roof, crooked fence, and a porch, the color of ash, May spoke softly, unprompted, as if to the air itself. "We're not asking for anything, only not to be separated." The words fell like a pebble into a stagnant pond. No echo, no ripple. Elias waited a beat, then replied, voice dry as burnt wood, "I'm not much for talking, but I've got land." The gate opened. There was no welcome, no one waiting, only a quiet patch of earth, where time seemed to have stopped since some forgotten winter Elias no longer bothered to count. The wagon came to a halt. No one could explain the terms of the exchange. There were no signatures, no laws, no trust. Just a wad of bills, a porch roof, and two strangers, a transaction with no contract and no exit. Only a look that no one else could understand. But anyone who had ever lost, ever waited, ever stood in silence watching time bury a doorstep, would understand. The road back to the ranch was no longer than usual. But that day, every turn felt like a year longer, and every rattle of the wagon sounded like a quiet knock on the heart of the one sitting behind. The rickety wagon groaned through every pothole, like an old beast dragging itself home through the aches of age and weather. Elias held the reins, eyes fixed ahead, the pine forest receding behind him. He said nothing. Before him the land opened gradually, the ground sloping upward, then dipping down again, a path he knew as well as his own skin, and yet today it felt like shadows followed each blade of grass. Behind him, May sat still, the baby asleep in her arms, lips pressed tight, as if any sound might shatter a fragile dream. The other children huddled close, heads resting on their mother's lap, hands gripping their sister's dress. Warmth passed from body to body like roots reaching for water beneath the soil. Silent and stubborn, the oldest boy, Jonas, sat at the back, his spine against the wooden frame. He looked at no one, his eyes fixed in the distance, his lips a firm line, his gaze like an old blade dulled with rust, but still sharp because it had never let go. Every time the wagon jolted, the baby cried out in short bursts. May soothed it by gently rocking her arms. Her mouth made no lullaby, just a breath long and thin, like a prayer lost in old rain. Elias didn't turn around, but he heard it, not with his ears, but with the memory of a man who had once rocked his own child to sleep with calloused hands and tired shoulders. At one bend in the trail, May spoke softly, perhaps to herself, but Elias heard, "We're not asking for anything, just not to be separated." Her voice wasn't pleading, wasn't demanding. It was a sentence spoken as if all hope had been emptied into it, then released to the wind. Elias kept his hands on the reins, eyes on the road. He was never good with words, never had been. After a while, he replied, "I'm not good at talking, but I've got land." It wasn't a promise, nor was it a refusal. It was like lighting a single oil lamp on a stormy night, not certain how far it would shine, but just enough to show the person beside you that they weren't alone. No one asked anything more. Evening crept in. The clouds were still, the sky like a gray wool scarf draped over the hills. Wet grass sagged along the road, green fading into wind-blown yellow. The ranch came into view from afar, low-roofed, weathered, quiet as a piece of land that had forgotten people once lived on it. Elias pulled the horse to a stop. No one came out. No dog barked. Just the creak of wagon wheels, then silence as if no one had arrived at all. He climbed down and opened the gate. May lifted the baby. Jonas helped his siblings. She stepped down without asking, "Where do we stay?" or "How long?" Elias gestured toward the old shed behind the main house. "I've got a cabin, old, but it's got a roof. Wood's damp, but fire'll catch." May gave a small nod. No thank you, no questions. She simply looked around, like someone who had passed through too many roofs, not her own, and this time tried standing still a little longer than usual. Jonas set the fabric bag near the threshold. His hands were stiff, but his eyes watched Elias with caution. Not hatred, just the guard of someone who'd once had something precious taken away. Elias looked at the boy, not with understanding, not trying to be a father. He simply pulled the porch cover down a little farther so the rain wouldn't fall on the step. Then he walked away, quietly, as always. Night fell fast. The wind slipped through the cracks in the walls like a serpent of fire. Inside the ranch, no one ate together. Each person kept to their corner, each breath their own. But for the first time in many years, Elias heard voices beneath his roof. The clink of spoons, a lullaby sung through breath alone, the tiny feet of a child stumbling in the dark. No conversation, no good night, just a roof, with people beneath it. And for Elias, that was enough for something long forgotten to begin stirring. The next morning, Elias woke early, as he always did. The same old creak of the door hinge, the soft echo of worn wood beneath his boots, and that first ray of light slicing through the plank wall. The kind of light that makes the dust in the air float like mist. But something was different. Today he was no longer the only soul waking the sun in this ranch. From the back of the house, the place he once used as a storage room, came the faint stir of life. The rustle of fabric brushing together, the clink of spoon against pot, and the scent of something simmering. Not the weak, bitter coffee he used to brew for himself, but the smell of rice porridge, simple, but enough to make the house feel alive. Elias sat on the porch steps, cane in hand. The air was crisp. His shoes were set neatly beside his rubber boots. Next to them, a pair of small sandals, thin as paper, still marked with yesterday's mud, from one of the children. The sandals lay straight, not crooked, as if the child believed they'd be worn again soon. He didn't touch them, he just looked. When he stepped into the house, Elias paused at the threshold. Inside, May was kneeling, scrubbing the floor with an old cloth. 3 of the children were outside the window gathering kindling. The baby slept, curled in a shawl. No one stepped into the living room. That room had become sacred ground, untouched since the day his wife and daughter passed. The photograph still hung in its place. A woman laughing sideways, holding a curly-haired little girl. The curtain still draped halfway, half bathed in sunlight, half cloaked in the dust of time. A dark indigo scarf, once belonging to his wife, still lay draped across the back of the wooden chair where his daughter used to sit and listen to him tell stories. All these years, Elias hadn't dared wash it, hadn't dared put it away, and couldn't throw it out. He stepped forward, touched it gently, with the tips of 2 fingers, as if afraid to tear the past, and for the first time in many years, Elias lifted the scarf. No one saw, no one watched, no one knew. He took it outside, washed it by hand at the well. Cold water, cheap soap. The dirt bled out like old tears. Tears no one counted. When he finished, he hung it on the line, centered carefully, to let the morning sun dry memory itself. Inside the house, May saw his shadow pass the window. She said nothing, but that afternoon the scarf had been folded neatly and placed back on the chair, now clean, carrying the scent of wind. Beside it sat a small wildflower, the kind that grew along the stream behind the house, pressed flat and placed there as if someone were quietly saying, "I know this matters." No one asked. No one spoke of the living room. But that day, something entered Elias's heart, light as wind, slow as season, but enough for a man who had once gone silent inside to feel quietly that he was still alive. When the sunlight reached the ridge of the barn roof, Elias was driving fence posts into the southern line, the slope of land that always gave way when the first rains of the season swept through. He held the hammer tight, the glove on his right hand torn at the thumb. Sweat soaked through the middle of his shirt. The smell of wet wood, the bite of rust from the wire coils. It was the scent of time fallen asleep on this dry land, but Elias was used to it. The land was like an old friend to him, silent, dry, and never asking questions. Not far off, the oldest boy, Jonas, was building a fire beside the old cattle shed. No one told him what to do, but he did it anyway, with the stoic will of a boy who had long learned to fend for himself. He placed a piece of wood on the flame, watched it catch, then glanced toward Elias. That look wasn't curiosity, and it wasn't gratitude. It was the kind of look as thin as a blade, direct, cold, and sharpened by things no one had ever said aloud. Elias kept planting fence posts. Jonas stood up and walked over without hesitation. "We don't need another dumb old man who doesn't talk," the boy said flatly, his voice dry and fearless. "My father was a soldier. You're not like him." Elias didn't turn. He paused only for a second, then kept hammering posts into the earth as if he hadn't heard. No reaction, no correction, just the steady beat of hammer on wood between 2 males, one grown, one still growing, standing face to face, but not on the same side. Jonas squinted. He wasn't used to being ignored. He had fought all his life not to be dismissed. And now this man, who barely spoke, couldn't even be bothered to answer. Jonas turned away, kicked a rock into the distance, and walked quietly back toward the canvas shelter, where his mother and siblings were hanging diapers to dry. That night the cold came sudden. The wind slipped through the gaps in the barn walls. May lit the stove. The 3 youngest huddled together. Elias didn't eat with them. He carried his portion to the porch as he had through many seasons where no one cooked but him. Jonas lay curled in one corner, wrapped in a torn blanket, back turned outward, his face pressed against the wall, eyes wide open in the dark. Elias's footsteps passed softly across the packed dirt floor. No one looked up, but everyone heard. He said nothing, just placed a thicker blanket beside Jonas's head. It smelled of sunlight, just aired out earlier that afternoon. No one said a word. Jonas didn't move, but his hand slid to the edge of the blanket, testing if it was real or part of a dream. Then he curled into it, eyes closing. At the porch, Elias stood for a moment, his shadow long across the wall. No thank you, no glance, just a small gesture between two males. No words needed to understand. That night was the coldest since the season began. Wind howled through the trees like the voices of things lost long ago. Elias couldn't sleep. He sat beside the dead stove, slowly turning an old tin cup in his hands. No coffee, no whiskey, just something warm to hold on to. Out in the back shelter, Jonas shifted. He opened his eyes, watching moonlight shine through a rip in the tent roof. In that silver light, the thick blanket the old man had left covered him nearly to the neck. Jonas pulled it up just a little more, then turned his face inward. Said nothing. But for the first time, he didn't dream of his father. Some mornings come earlier than one expects, as if the night wind forgot to shut the door and let dawn slip into the house too soon. Elias sat on the porch, honing an old knife with a worn whetstone. The blade caught the cold light reflecting his face, a face no longer resisting time. The thick canvas coat draped over his shoulders was frayed at the seams. A tear at the right elbow exposed the inner lining. Elias didn't mind. It was the same coat he'd worn since the winter his daughter passed. He had never patched it, never replaced it. He lived as if torn fabric too held memory, and no one ought to mend the past. May noticed the coat for the first time while hanging laundry out back. Elias had left it on a chair, still carrying the scent of sweat, firewood ash, and wind. She didn't ask, didn't seek permission. She simply picked it up, fingers brushing the torn edge. Her fingertips touched the loose thread, soft as a broken feather. She said nothing, only took out a blunt needle, a faded spool of black-blue thread, and sat beneath the tree to sew. Each stitch steady, not for anyone, not out of duty, but because there was something in Elias's silence that she couldn't turn away from. The children played nearby. Jonas caught sight of her sewing, but said nothing. He didn't understand why his mother was mending a coat for a man who was neither kin nor promise. But he didn't ask, because somewhere deep inside, even if he hadn't admitted it, he too wanted to believe in something that didn't need a reason. That afternoon, Elias returned to the ranch and found the coat folded neatly on the porch steps. The tear had been mended, not prettily, but strong. Pinned near the edge was a slip of paper, just a torn corner from an old envelope, written in pencil. Didn't do it for you. Did it so my child wouldn't get scratched sleeping against your coat. The handwriting wasn't gentle and the tone wasn't sweet. It was the kind of tone used by someone life had beaten down too many times, someone with no energy left for prettiness. Elias picked up the coat and stood still. No thank you, no glancing around. He simply stepped inside and hung the coat back where it always had been, in the spot he had kept untouched for years. But today he folded it, with care, with quiet hands. For the first time he folded it as if he meant to wear it again tomorrow. Evening fell. May split kindling. Jonas lit the fire. The children peeled potatoes with a dull knife. No one mentioned the coat. No praise was given. No one acted like they'd done something grand. But something small, as silent as dust in the late sun, began to cling to the porch corner, to the wooden walls, to the soil, and to the hearts. Something called care. No words needed, no titles, just I see you exist, and I won't turn away." That night, Elias wore the mended coat and stepped outside to look at the sky. Wind slipped through his silver hair, through the brim of his weathered straw hat. He gently pulled the collar up out of habit, but this time no wind slipped through the tear to make him shiver. At his feet, 6 small pairs of sandals lay neatly beside his boots, and the coat, still smelling of new thread, no longer smelled like loneliness. That night, snow fell earlier than any year before. The sky was a pale silver gray, no rain, no wind, just a dense white veil settling over the land, as if someone had quietly drawn the light out of every plank of wood, every blade of grass. Wind slipped through the cracks in the door like the labored breath of someone weary. Elias stuffed burlap sacks into the window frames, his eyes drifting up toward the roof, where snow was already starting to stack in thin layers. In the small room at the back, Ellie, the youngest, lay curled up, cheeks flushed red. Her forehead burned with fever, her breath raspy like the bellows of an old brick kiln. May swapped cloths, brought down the heat with well water. The children sat close, none of them crying, just watching their sister the way one watches a flickering oil lamp in a gust of wind. Elias stood outside the half-open door. No one called for him, and no one had to. Less than 30 minutes later, Elias was bundled in his thickest coat, a rope cinched around his waist, gloved hands, boots strapped tight for snow. He led the old horse out from the stall. May ran after him, standing by the fence where wind whipped the air. "You're crazy! The snow's up to your waist! The road's closed! You don't even know!" Elias didn't turn around. He only said hoarsely, just loud enough, "I know that child is still breathing." Then he mounted the horse. No saddle, no whip, and no peace of mind. The road to town was 10 miles. On a good day, it took half the day. But in snow and in the dark, no one counted hours anymore. Only the rhythm of the horse's heart and the rasping in one's own lungs. Wind slapped Elias's face like cold fingers, tugging skin raw. Snow slammed into his coat as if someone were salting an old wound. But he kept going. No complaint, no upward glance, no turning back. The old horse slipped more than once on the icy slopes. Elias didn't scold it. He simply dismounted and led it on foot, legs sinking deep, knees trembling but eyes hard as steel in the fog. When he reached the old apothecary at the edge of town, the sky had not yet lightened. A sickly yellow oil lamp glowed behind a window pane. Elias knocked 3 times, then let himself in. He set a small pouch on the table, a few coins, a pocket knife, and a child's wooden necklace, his daughter's old toy, her name Lucy, carved in with the tip of a blade. The old pharmacist didn't ask. He simply handed Elias a bundle of medicine wrapped in cloth. No prescription, no words. When Elias returned to the ranch, he didn't go inside. He placed the medicine carefully on the doorstep, right where a child's footprints had been pressed into the snow the day before. Then he walked toward the horse trough, crawled into the old barn corner and sat down, his back against the wall. His face was pale from the cold, his coat soaked, hands frozen stiff around the reins. But he smiled, barely, like a man who had finally done what needed to be done. The next morning, May opened the door. The medicine bundle was still there. Snow had dusted over the blue ink label. Beside it, Elias lay curled, his coat pulled over his face, boots still caked with frozen mud. May didn't call out. She simply stepped inside, retrieved the thickest blanket, and gently draped it over his shoulders, as if he were only sleeping. The children awoke. Ellie's fever had broken. Her lips moved softly in a dream. Elias stayed sleeping on the porch. No words, no request, no concern for who might thank him. But that morning, for the first time, when Elias stepped into the kitchen, there was a chair already pulled out, waiting for him. That day there was no snow, but the air was heavy. like a whetstone grinding down on an old axe blade. May was hauling a bucket of water from the well when Elias returned from the field. His eyes froze for a second. Then he stepped quickly toward the porch. His hand, instinctively grabbing the shovel, leaned against the wall. A black two-horse carriage with a high canopy rolled slowly past the line of birches at the end of the dirt road. The horses were glossy, reins braided with red thread. The wheels bore no mud, as if their owner never had to worry about dirt touching his life. The man in the carriage wore a fur coat, leather gloves, and a smile that never reached his eyes. He didn't need to introduce himself. Foster Kane, owner of Kane's Hollow Ranch, a man whose land stretched all the way to the Pecos River, and whose greed had no boundary. He stepped down, voice sharp as a crow's cry over fresh prey. "I had a down payment on that lot." His hand pointed to May, then slid past the children washing bowls in the back. Ellie clutched her mother's skirt, and Jonas stepped forward on instinct. Foster didn't care. "No papers, no marriage, no witnesses. You live with him on unregistered land, under the same roof. You know what folks will say, May." He said her name, not out of familiarity, but possession. Elias tightened his grip on the shovel. He said nothing, didn't move. His shadow stretched across the ground like an old tree refusing to bow to storm. May stood still, no arguing. Her face showed no rage, no tremble, just pale like blank paper not yet written on. Foster chuckled softly. "I remember the last time you came to my store. No money, just dried meat. I was generous, gave you some suggestions. And now you choose this old man." From the doorway, Elias took one step forward. No gun, no need. Only his eyes, dark as mountain rock, fixed on Foster like a man eyeing a wild animal nesting too close to his vegetable patch. The entire yard was silent, only the wind threading through tin. Foster eased back, then scoffed, wrapping his gloves on the side of the carriage. "I'll sue. The court doesn't care about kindness. It cares about documents, and I've got plenty of those." He turned, climbed back onto his carriage. The wheels spun. Dust lifted in strips, like quiet dread tearing through the heart. That night, May didn't eat. She sat by the fire, a small whittling knife in her hand, as if, with enough patience, she could carve away a past that had embedded itself in her skin. Elias placed a pot of warm water near her, then walked away in silence. Not a word. The children didn't ask their mother anything. But from that night on, Jonas began sharpening his blade. And for the first time, little Ellie tugged on Elias's coat as he passed. "Is he gonna take my mama away?" Elias knelt, placing a hand on her small shoulder. "No, no one takes anyone when we know we're home." The next morning, Elias rode into town, not to buy a plow blade, not to buy sugar, but to see someone, a man with no reputation, no power, but who once had been a brilliant lawyer, before losing his wife to an unjust case. And for the first time in over a year, Elias opened his mouth to a stranger. "I don't have money, but I've got heart." Ever since Foster left, no one mentioned his name again. But a name like his didn't need to be spoken. It had become a shadow, a heavy cloud hovering above the ranch roof. Rumors spread faster than wind. Shops closed early when Elias walked in. Women at the well washed their hands longer than needed when May passed. The local children stopped teasing Elias's kids, not out of kindness, but because grown-up trouble scared them more than cruelty ever had. No one raised their voice, but whispers can chill the land more than snow. One afternoon, Elias returned from walking Jonas to school, where the boy had been placed at a desk all by himself, as if poverty were contagious. He set the sack of rice on the kitchen table and quietly removed his gloves. May was tidying up the bowls, her hands trembling slightly. The soup had gone cold. No one had touched dinner. No words were spoken. until May softly closed the door, turned to face Elias, standing only an arm's length away, and said, in a voice not loud but heavy like a stone dropped into a dry well, "You don't have to do this." Elias looked at her, not surprised, not defensive, just still. May went on, "I know, Foster, the court, the land. You could walk away. No one would blame you. We're used to that." She lifted her chin, her eyes no longer guarded, just weary, the kind of tired found in someone who's had to be strong too long. "Why did you buy us? No papers, no vows, no promises. You didn't owe us anything." Elias removed his hat, sat down on the wooden chair, hands resting on his knees. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then finally, his voice emerged, slow like memories pulled from long-cooled ash. "There was someone I once loved. I left her alone, when I should have stayed." His voice was low, like wind passing through a cold fireplace. "I couldn't save her, not in time, not with enough courage." May didn't ask who. She didn't need to. Elias looked up. "I don't know if redemption's real, but if I still have time to keep someone from slipping away, this time I won't stand still." May lowered her head. Her fingers brushed the hem of his coat, the one he'd worn through the snow. The stitches on the sleeve were coming loose again. She spoke quietly. "I used to think men only helped to get something back, some kind of trade." Elias shook his head, his eyes clearing like the sky after rain. "Not all men, but I understand why you'd think that." The silence that followed didn't need to be filled. May rose, walked to the kitchen, filled a wooden cup with water, and set it in front of Elias. "I don't have much to give in return, but the children, they'll grow up, and they'll remember." Elias didn't touch the cup. He only nodded, enough to say, "I heard you," and enough to say no more words were needed. That night, Elias sat on the porch, as always. But for the first time, there were two chairs side by side, empty but close. On the small table between them sat two wooden cups, one for him and one for someone not yet seated. There are thank yous that never get spoken aloud, and they don't need to be, because that weathered old man, at last, had found a reason to stay. That night the wind turned cold without warning. The fire in the stove gave a few soft cracks, then went silent, as if even the coals were too tired to burn. In the small wooden house, the children were already asleep, curled into patched quilts. May sat darning an old sock, and Elias near the door, quietly shaving the handle of a hoe with a dull whittling knife, making it fit his hand just right. No one spoke, but the peace in that poor home was real. Until May stood to check each bed. Ellie, Clay, Rowan, Maddie, all still, breathing gently. But Jonas wasn't there. May didn't panic right away. She checked again, under the beds, behind the door, the chicken coop, no sign. But it was when she saw Jonas's muddy boots, still upright in the corner of the room, cold, dry, untouched, that her chest began to tighten, like a thread about to snap. Elias heard her hurried steps. His eyes shifted instantly, no questions needed. He threw on his coat, pulled on his boots. May reached for the old rifle, her late husband's, and slung it across her chest. It was the first time Elias had seen her carry a gun, not because she was afraid, but because she had once not been afraid, and paid the price. They left in silence. The oil lamp lit just enough to see a single step ahead. But May had a feeling, the kind of instinct a mother carries after living with hunger, fear, and men who never needed a reason to do harm. They searched the abandoned barn near the railway, Jonas's usual spot when he was upset. Nothing, no footprints. Then the old horse shed near Foster's ranch. The wind carried the smell of animal hair and rotting hay and something else. Sweat, human scent. Elias raised his hand. They pressed close to the barn wall, listening, then breathing, quick, shallow, rope scratching wood. May rushed in first. Elias followed. In the dim flicker of their lamp, they saw Jonas, his hands bound, tied to a post with coarse farm rope, a rag stuffed in his mouth, his eyes wide, not with fear, but with rage. May ran to him, pulled the gag, undid the rope, and held him close. Elias stood silently, scanning the space. Bootprints, broken grass, a torn scrap of leather, no one there. But he knew. This wasn't an accident. This was a warning. On the way back, Jonas said nothing. He met Elias's gaze with silence, hardened like steel. At the porch, Elias removed his coat and laid it over Jonas's shoulders. His hand paused at the boy's neck, a light squeeze, not to control, but to hold on to a soul about to crack. Jonas rasped, "Why'd you take so long?" Elias didn't answer. He only knelt, placed a hand on the rope that had bound the boy, then stood again, quietly. May watched them, an old man and a boy, standing beneath the porch roof. Neither of them knew how to hug, or apologize, or say father or son. But from that night on, Jonas never called Elias that old man again. And the next morning, when Elias went out to the barn, he found the hoe handle had been shaped by another's hand, just right. Not too thick, not too thin. Children speak with words, but those who've been abandoned too many times, they speak with action. That morning the wind was still, but no one at the ranch felt at ease. May tied back her hair with a torn strip of cloth, her hands still trembling slightly from the night before. Ellie clung to her mother, not playing like she usually did. And Jonas, he sat in the yard, sharpening a small knife, his face blank. Elias led his horse out of the barn. He said nothing about where he was going. But May knew. Jonas knew. They all knew. Town was busier than usual that morning, but no one really saw Elias. He walked into the sheriff's office. The wooden door swung open. Inside sat a round-bellied man in a worn vest, boots polished to a shine yet spotless. The kind of man who never stepped off wooden floors to feel what dirt did to fingernails. Elias spoke, slowly, clearly, without begging. He told him about Jonas being taken, about the tracks by the barn, about the threat that had no name but every certainty. The sheriff raised an eyebrow, propped his boots on the desk, and said, "The boy's fine, ain't he? Then what's there to investigate?" Elias didn't answer. He just stared. A stare that once stopped a charging buffalo. The sheriff cleared his throat, dabbed his forehead with a handkerchief. "I get it, but Foster Kane's a respectable man. You got any proof? Witnesses? Documents proving you own the kid?" He stressed the word own, like he was talking about a stray calf, not a child bound and gagged in the middle of the night. Elias stood, didn't say goodbye, didn't need to. He walked out, and kept walking, step by step, no horse, no wagon. He knocked on the preacher's door. No one answered. He went to the head of the farm council. The man was having breakfast, but when he saw Elias through the window, he shut the shutters. Finally, Elias stopped in front of a small house. Low fence, front door always locked twice. Inside lived a man who had once been a lawyer, now a ghost in the ruins of his own memories. Elias knocked. No response. He knocked again. Still silence. He turned to leave. When the door creaked open, the man appeared, hair wild, face covered in beard, a bottle in one hand, his eyes red but lit like embers that had just caught flame again. "What do you want?" Elias removed his hat. "I've got no money, but I've got heart." The lawyer stared at him for a long moment, then said, "Men with heart usually lose, but sometimes they're the only ones left standing." He opened the door wider. Elias stepped inside. Back at the ranch, May waited. Dinner wasn't cooked. The children sat near the stove, eyes on the dusty road. Jonas still sat in the yard, his knife worn thin from sharpening. He looked up when Elias returned. with nothing in hand, no good news. But something was different, his back straighter, his eyes steadier. "No one's helping?" Jonas asked. Elias didn't respond. He simply set a stack of papers on the table. Notes, statements, shaky handwriting. Not much, but a beginning. That night, Elias sat on the porch again. There was a moon, not bright, but enough to see the road. May placed a cup of coffee beside him. No questions, no comfort. She just sat beside him, as if neither of them needed the world to believe in them, so long as they still believed in each other. Justice doesn't come easy, but Elias had taken the first steps. Not to win, but because of a silent promise in his chest. He would not watch another child be left behind. The county courthouse was a small brick building by a dry riverbed. Most weeks it handled stray horses, disputed fences, and the occasional drunk brawl out by the saloon. But today, the crowd was larger than usual. Inside, the wooden benches creaked beneath the weight of silent stares. The townsfolk weren't noisy. They hadn't come to intervene, but to watch, like watching a fire from a distance, part pity, part fear of getting burned. Elias sat in the front row, hat in his lap, fingers gripping the brim. May sat beside him, no makeup, no fine dress, just a woman who had always stood outside the edges of every banquet table. Foster Kane entered with his lawyer. He wore leather-polished boots, a silver-tipped cane, but it was his eyes that unsettled most, not because they were cruel, but because they were certain he was right. "I placed a deposit on that woman," Foster said, his voice as hard as the handle of a shovel. "She broke the contract. Now she's living with a man, no marriage, no registration, bringing children into a home with no legal custody. That ranch is now an unlawful harbor." His lawyer handed over papers, smudged text, vague clauses. But here the law was words, not conscience. The judge was an old man with thick glasses, breathing like trees at the end of a dry season. He looked at Elias. "Have you anything to say?" Elias stood. He carried no documents, only calloused hands, thin from work and time. "I'm not asking for mercy," he said. "I'm asking to keep." The room went still. "I don't have your kind of proof, but I have people. I have survival. I didn't buy anyone. I just didn't let them fall again." A murmur rose. A few shook their heads. Others glanced at May as if waiting for the curtain to fall. But May stood, not with pride, but like a reed in the early winter wind. "I've been sold before, not once, many times." Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried to every corner. "I've traded chickens for torn canvas. I've traded my body for a saddle. No one ever gave me anything but contempt. Elias Rourke didn't ask me a thing. He didn't touch my hand. He didn't demand a single thing. He just brought us home." She turned to the judge, eyes wet but clear. "If decency is a crime, then your laws have rotted." No one dared breathe too loud. Foster's lawyer tried to rebut, but his words drowned in a silence no one could name. The judge laid a hand on the bench. His pen slipped from his fingers. No one bent to pick it up. "The court will consider." That was all. No victory, no defeat, just a pause before the next storm. After the hearing, Elias stepped outside. Jonas was waiting, standing under the awning, gripping his small knife tightly. "They didn't decide today?" Jonas asked. Elias shook his head, said nothing. "So, what now?" Elias looked at him for a long time, then answered, "Now we go home. Coop needs mending. Tonight's wind'll cut through if we don't." Justice in the West didn't come by verdict. It came by staying, by the simple act of still sitting down to supper together, even if no one called each other anything at all. The news didn't arrive with a knock on the door, but with a wax-sealed envelope left beneath the ranch gate. Jonas was the first to pick it up. He handed it to May, then ran toward the edge of the land, eyes red. though no one heard him cry. May quietly tore the seal. Her eyes scanned the lines as if they were written in a foreign tongue. A notice from the county court, stating that Elias's land, lacking proper finalized ownership documents, would have its temporary grant revoked, and the ranch, including all residents on it, would fall under administrative inventory and processing. Not a word about the people who lived there, no mention of Ellie or the trembling pinewood dinner table that stood against the wind. Just decisions made from far away, in places where no one had ever heard the name Elias Rourke. Elias read the letter, said nothing. He set the paper on the table beside an old chipped mug, then stood, slowly, as if his bones were consulting old memories only he could hear. May cooked dinner like any other day, but that night no one touched their bowls. For the first time since arriving at the ranch, Jonas slammed his fist on the table. "You said you wouldn't leave us!" The ceramic bowls clattered. Ellie burst into tears. Elias didn't react. He only turned to the window, toward the weathered fence posts, each one waiting to fall like a silent threat. The next morning the sky was heavy with clouds. No parcels, no new letters, just the sound of wood being driven into earth. Elias had risen before dawn. He was rebuilding the fence along the western edge, the one that had fallen last winter and never been fixed. No one told him to do it, and no one tried to stop him. May stood at the doorway, hand resting on her chest, as if trying to keep something from breaking inside. "They'll take it all." Elias didn't look up. He planted the post and struck it with the mallet. Each blow solid, final. "If there's still dirt under my feet," he said, "then I build the fence." The children began to come outside, without being asked. Jonas brought an axe. Ellie carried a basket of nails. The others wore canvas gloves. No one said a word, but the fence began to stretch farther, a crooked, honest line of wood, running the edge of land the state had claimed. May brought water. She placed it beside Elias, the old cup from his days living alone. Not new, but clean. "Are you building a fence?" she asked, "or something else?" Elias looked at her, his eyes hollow and tired. "I'm building something they don't have papers for." That afternoon, Elias returned to the house. He pulled off his boots, washed his hands. He stepped into the kitchen, but didn't bring his soup out to the porch. Like usual, he sat at the table, next to May, near Jonas. No one invited him. No one waited. There was just a meal. There was just presence. May placed a piece of potato in his bowl. Ellie handed him a cup of water. Jonas glanced at him, then lowered his eyes, saying nothing, but slid an extra slice of bread onto Elias's plate. At that meal no one mentioned the land, or the letter, or the court, but from that moment on, everyone in that weathered wooden house understood. Even if they had no title, no claim in the county ledgers, they had each other. And sometimes, that's the kind of law no system can ever reach. The sky the next morning wasn't clear, but it didn't rain either. There was only that milky white light, like a linen cloth draped across a land holding its breath. Elias rose early, not to fix the fence this time, but to tighten the hinge on the gate that creaked every time the wind passed through. The children were still asleep. May was stirring the fire. The house smelled of dry wood, roasted potatoes, and something else, something harder to name, but strong enough to make Elias pause as he passed the kitchen table. There it lay, a scrap of old-school paper torn from a notebook. The handwriting leaned and wobbled, as if the writer wasn't used to holding a pen, or had been trembling as they wrote, "I have a home now. I don't have to dream anymore." Beneath it, a crude drawing, a house, 6 people and one tall figure wearing a wide-brimmed hat standing in the middle. Elias didn't touch the paper. He only looked. Then slowly, He pulled out a chair and sat down, as if, in that little drawing, that very chair had always been his, just waiting to be offered, until today. May set down the morning bowl of soup in front of him. For the first time, Elias ate in the kitchen with everyone, instead of quietly taking his meal to the porch like every other day. Jonas came in last. He glanced at the paper, then sat down, saying nothing. May poured coffee and placed the cup near Elias's hand. No questions. The whole family, if anyone dared call it that, sat around the table. No words, no ceremony, only spoons brushing bowls, gentle blowing on hot broth, and eyes occasionally finding one another, no longer flinching away. Elias ate slowly, as if each bite carried a strange new flavor, not from the seasoning but from presence, from belonging, something he had never let himself hope for since the day he lost his own daughter. He looked at Ellie, the youngest, sipping from her spoon and gazing at him with bright eyes. Not afraid, not distant. She was the one who wrote the note. Elias wanted to say something, but no words were enough. So instead, he stood and walked out to the porch. In his hand, he carried that little piece of school paper. There on the doorstep, where his daughter once left her shoes, stood 6 small pairs of boots, each one facing outward in neat rows, as if quietly promising, "We'll keep walking, together." Elias sat on the steps. The wind shifted. The paper slipped from his hand, fluttered down to the ground, and curled slightly at the corner, as if reminding him to read it once more. "I don't have to dream anymore." He chuckled, for the first time in a long while. Not loud, but enough for May, watching from the kitchen, to see, and in that moment she knew. Even if Foster hadn't given up, even if the land still bore no name, Elias Rourke, the man who once lived in the past, had finally stepped into the present. And sometimes the miracle doesn't come from winning the world, but from a child quietly writing, "Here I have a home." The northern wind returned with the start of the month, carrying the scent of damp grass, dry earth, and weary dust from the faraway hills. Winter was nearly over. The court case hadn't concluded. The law hadn't changed. And Foster Kane still rode through town each week with the smug air of a man certain he had already won. But on the Rourke homestead, no one spoke of him anymore. Not because they weren't afraid, but because they were living, truly living, as if that life didn't require permission. Elias rose early, same as always. He walked through the kitchen and stoked the fire, brewed coffee by hand, a habit he once did for himself, now done for everyone. No one asked, but everyone counted on it. May rose next, wrapped her hair in a worn cloth, washed her face, then stepped behind Elias and placed a quiet hand on his shoulder, as if to say, "Today is still a day worth living." The children woke one by one, not shouting like noisy kin, just stepping out, pulling on their boots, lining them up beside Elias's old pair by the door. 6 pairs, each different, small, big, worn, or nearly new, but placed side by side, facing the same way, like 6 heartbeats learning to follow a rhythm, slow and steady, like the footsteps of a man who had never given up. No one called him father. They didn't have to. Jonas, the oldest, was fixing the barn roof that day. When Elias reached to steady the ladder, Jonas didn't bark or say, "I got it." He simply handed down an extra nail and said, "Keep this for me, in case I forget tomorrow." For the first time, Elias held something for someone else, not out of duty, but because he was trusted. May brought out an old cloth to hang on the porch chair. It had clumsy embroidered flowers, just a few red and purple stitches. Elias noticed, didn't say beautiful or thank you, just sat in the chair for the first time, leaning back, closing his eyes, breathing deep. Outside, the sky lightened, not with brilliant sunshine, but with the kind of pale, quiet light that promises nothing and takes nothing away. From the stable came small footsteps. Ellie ran up, tiny hands holding a wooden knife. "I sharpened it again for apples." Elias took the knife, didn't say a word, just turned it over, nodded, as if he'd just been entrusted with a treasure he never dared dream of keeping. And then, at breakfast, not enough bowls, so they took turns. A long silence settled over the table. Elias looked around, May ladling out more soup, Jonas chewing slowly, without a scowl, the little ones laughing with their eyes. And beneath the table, 6 pairs of boots, lined beside his. The court might seize the land, Foster might win, but Elias Rourke knew he had already reclaimed what he thought was lost forever, a home, not because of blood, but because people had chosen not to leave one another. Out on the porch, the wind swept across the field again. Elias stepped outside, apple knife in hand, slicing thin wedges, placing them on a wooden plate. He sat down, waiting as each child came out, taking 1 piece each, no asking, no shyness, until only 1 slice remained. Elias looked at it, then left it there. Saved. No one asked who it was for. But in his heart, Elias knew it was for someone. Someone who might come, or hadn't arrived yet, or maybe was already here. Himself in the days still to come. In this land where folks tend to lose more than they keep, Elias Rourke didn't need to be called father. He only needed to wake each morning and see 6 little pairs of boots lined beside his old ones. There would be no final verdict, no clear victory. But some things, when people don't leave one another, are already the best of what the world still has to offer. If this story reminds you of someone who once stepped into your life, not with declarations of love, but by simply staying, share it with me in the comments. Just 1 line is enough. So we'll know kindness still has a place, even in the harshest corners of the West.